One.
Hello, everyone. And it looks like I might be missing here, Alex. So
Yeah, I
let's see
know.
what you
We literally
got.
just tested this, but
Well, welcome everyone again to Alex's. My name is Alex, and my counterpart here. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
yeah. Hello, Alex. I am Alex Dupler. I'm a PM at Microsoft who works on non-Power BI stuff, but I do business intelligence for advertising folks.
So just two Microsoft employees here hanging out, our own personal time, just doing a little bit of fun stuff. There we go. He's getting me caught back up. And then for today, our topic, kind of definitely a hot one from the chat from last time. We're looking at documentation in Power BI. And I know personally, I'm someone who hates documenting. I never feel like something is done. I never feel like it's in a complete state where I want to stop and just like write things down. Alex, how are you feeling on the documentation side?
Yeah. I mean, that's also a big challenge for me. I think we have pretty different experiences because my day job, I work on one model every day. One model is the only thing we work on, and so like we want to put a lot more effort into it than most folks do, but still we really struggle with documentation. You know, we've got months into this project and we're just starting to do documentation.
And then, it sounds like we got some feedback on the audio here again.
Oh
Alex
man.
Six, thanks for calling us out, man. We did
Yeah.
all the prep work in preparation too.
Yeah, it was fine before.
We'll give this a few seconds then. Yeah, so I mean, especially if you're just like working maybe in a singular department or maybe like kind of single model, which obviously is more like utopian. I think the rest of us are like, hey, we're having to do a lot. Awesome, thanks, Alex. Kind of keeping us up to check
Uh,
there. So if you're having to do a lot of different work on kind of various different models, how can we do as much as possible through just native Power BI,
yeah.
automation, kind of DMVs, which are these dynamic management views, or I mean, a couple other options too. We're looking at Vertipack Analyzer, so just a lot of different things we're kind of thinking about today.
Yeah. And then once we go through some of the built-in sort of cool techie stuff you can do, we'll also talk about what do you just have to like bite the bullet and sit down and write, because not everything is going to fit into something you can automate, unfortunately.
I would agree.
So
And then where do you also stop? Like,
yeah.
and where do you start? Because I think a lot for you and me is like design decisions, especially if it's
Yeah.
something technical where you're like having to do something left of center. You're like, all right, I should probably document this for the next person.
Yeah, one of the things that we're really trying to stick to, this is something we got from a video Chris Wagner did a few months ago. One of the philosophies they have at Rockwell is anytime a user asks a question through a support channel, you never ever reply with anything other than documentation. And so if they need an answer that's not in your documentation, now is when you write the documentation. And then send them a link. Don't send them an email with the stuff that later you have to write into the documentation. Not something we've managed to stick to, but I think that's a really great starting point for a lot of folks.
And let us know in the chat kind of where your organization is at in terms of documentation.
Yeah.
Are you in a mature state? Is everything going through some CI/CD pipeline? And you're just like,
Yeah.
man, we document to the nth degree. Or if you're like, hey, we copy and paste things over to a Word doc and store it on a SharePoint. We hope that that's good enough.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Yana, for jumping in here too. And then let's start with kind of the native Power BI desktop experience,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, Alex.
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull stuff up, and let's see. And now the screen share isn't. Oh.
Yeah, and Donald here, just try and copy and paste emails kind of in the OneNote. So, yeah, OneNote, obviously kind of a great place for kind of quick hit documentation, good place to drop things. But, I mean, especially for anything long term. Is the screen share not pulling up?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start to share? I'm having some weird stuff on my computer where OBS isn't doing what it should be doing.
I'm going to start sharing again here.
Yeah.
I need you to have the stream come through. There we go. Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and start here. So Power BI desktop, if I'm just in the native application, what opportunities do I have for documentation here? Whenever I drop into a model, the first things I might start looking into is like when I hover above things. All right, so name is kind of customer transactions. If I was to zoom into this table, it tells me it's a storage mode of import, last refresh time. Similar with customers. All right, so we've got some metadata here at my table level. Maybe I'll expand into customers. And there we go. Customer name. If I hover above this, name, customer name, latitude, phone number. I mean, some of these things are like self-descriptive. Like it's not like reinventing the world. I'm just reading kind of top to bottom.
Yeah.
But if I go into the model view here now, it's on the right-hand side. Let's go to the customers table. I have this properties pane now, and I have description. So current, I don't know. Cool. So I now have a description of my table. You're like, all right, that's all right, Alex, but what does this really mean? How does this help me and my model and kind of my end users? Well, if I was to go back, let's say it's now kind of the shared or certified data set. My end users are ending up on my model, and they're starting to thumb through things, and maybe you're still using like dim as your table names. If I hover above this now, customers, I then have my listing here in my description. So a listing of all of our customers that are recent, comma current, I don't know. Who here is currently documenting the table descriptions or maybe even the column level descriptions? Let me know. So this is just the native kind of Power BI functionality.
Yeah, I mean this is the approach we're taking. In the past, we've done separate data dictionaries. That's been really popular in our org, but we really like putting things directly in the model. Yeah, Yana brings up a really good point. This really can help with folks that have screen readers, and it's just a more natural experience. But I don't know about you, but one of the experiences that I get from my users is I'll put this stuff in the descriptions, and then they'll still ask, is there a table about this? And I'm like, did you look at the table list? And so having some sort of external document folks can refer to often makes it easier for them to just sort of understand where they are. Like for some reason they find using the Object Explorer a bit intimidating, right?
Yep. So I mean that's like metadata though that we're starting to store in the file, and in theory we'd love to start exposing this through either a native functionality, maybe like a data catalog.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see the Azure Data Catalog get some love and start extracting these details out. So that's what I'm always thinking in the future. If I start adding these things now, hopefully Microsoft will catch up and start exposing these things to my end users in an easy format. So that's at least the table level here. Once again, it's also available at the column level. So within your model, if we were to go to customer name, kind of the descriptions here, the full name of our customer. So the full name of our customers.
Yeah.
Jump back over because I just want to show native once again.
So one question that I often have, Alex, and this is something you just did, which is like, I mean, obviously it was just an example, but which fields should you write descriptions for, right? Like the description there is a bit tautological, but on the other hand, if you don't write descriptions for every single field, will users know to expect descriptions to show up in your model?
Exactly. How much is too much? Let us know. Kind of in the comments here. And Donald was saying Azure Data Catalog is a little clunky in its current version. I would agree. I would love to see kind of a updated version. I mean, we just had to think about the pie in the sky. That has to be where they're going, though, right? It's just that all this metadata is contained within our models. Why can't we go through and kind of start exposing this?
Yeah.
Biggest question Kevin always gets is like, what is the original source?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also Donald saying descriptions for measures. Yes, so you can also do this against your measures.
Mm-hmm.
So just a lot of different places here.
Yeah.
which kind of leads us into maybe another one I wanted to kind of at least demonstrate here. If we go to the modeling view, manage roles, think about like row level security now. Florida sales rep. If I click on kind of our ellipsis here, create, duplicate, rename, I don't have any metadata about this role level activity. Like, I can't document anything here. So how do I make that documentation? Is that just a decision in my OneNote? Is that Microsoft Word?
Yeah. And,
I don't know.
And depending on the audience for your model, you may have non-technical folks that are very concerned with the precise implementation of RLS that want a very detailed walkthrough of how it works. And so while there's some technical means here, I really like making, like, for our RLS, a dedicated PowerPoint deck that's like, here is how you set it up, every single step, as well as here's how to audit it, and here are the errors you'll get if you don't have the right permissions, so that everybody knows that it's working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. And Mark Walter asked a great question here. So can you comment in kind of RLS here? So this is native Power BI, right? Native Power BI desktop. But we understand like Power BI is the database. There's that underlying JSON body. Hopefully whenever we see external tools kind of land here in our Power BI desktop, something we want to start thinking about. So if we were to jump over to our Tabular editor here now, and let's get that on the screen.
And Mark, narrowly, you can include comments in the RLS description. It's just like any other DAX object. Whether it's to comment out code, like you have a permission that you've implemented but haven't gotten sign off from your org. I'm in that situation now. But yeah.
So here was our role level security, right? Florida sales rep. If we scroll down here, we do have the metadata description.
Yeah.
So not in the native Power BI desktop experience, but exposed through some of these open source kind of third-party tools, we can start adding these descriptions.
Yeah.
So something to maybe start thinking about is also looking at, well, what can I not document directly in Power BI desktop, but maybe that I can through kind of these third-party tools. And Guang Dang saying ADC 2 is in private preview and hope for a big improvement with Power BI integration. Tableau has a decent approach with integrated data dictionary.
Yeah,
awesome. Glad to hear that.
That's good to hear. Usually, I try to avoid talking about things that are in private preview. I don't know. I don't know what your situation is, but yeah.
I love it. So here once again, Tabular editor. This is kind of the lightweight editing of our model, just writing back to that JSON body. At our table level here again, so orders, we can go into the description down here at the very bottom. We start documenting this here just in a lightweight, fast kind of motion. So if we selected multiple, maybe columns, kind of in this example, we can then update descriptions all at once and say 3 at a time.
Yeah. And one of the big advantages here is, I'm sure you've had this experience in Power BI, especially as your model starts to get bigger. Every time you make a change, whether it's renaming a measure, adding a description, the model does like a whole sanity check to make sure everything lines up. It actually recalculates a bunch of stuff, and that can make making little changes like this take forever. Now, Tabular editor, you can edit as many things as you want, and it doesn't do that type of validation until you actually save your changes. So on the one hand, it's easy to work for a while in Tabular editor and forget to save. But on the other hand, it's a really good way to make writing short little descriptions a lot less painful. And so I really recommend using it. And very soon, the ability to use Tabular editor to write descriptions to desktop will be coming. Will said in an interview that it was supposed to be in the June release. It was not, but that means it's almost certainly going to be in the July release. And editing descriptions is one of the things that we know is going to work. So highly recommend that as soon as we get the next release, this is how you start doing that type of change.
Well, you're hearing it from Alex.
Yeah.
He's thinking July it's gonna land. So
Yeah.
maybe something to start thinking about ahead of time. But we've written these descriptions. Like, what can we do with these, Alex? And I'll kind of pass this off to you for your monitor.
Yeah. Let me switch over to my monitor, and hopefully we'll actually see something this time. I don't know why everything totally. We just tested all of our display settings 20 minutes before the stream started. We didn't quote any programs, didn't stop streaming, and then as soon as we started talking, all the cameras rearranged themselves.
I love Fernando's question here. Regarding visualization, do you suggest including instructions or leaving them as clean as possible? I mean, if it's a kind of like an intense visual, I mean, definitely use like the tooltips.
Yeah.
Just have that covered above, and you can include those instructions. I know Reed Havens has done some really great videos on those topics.
Yeah, another technique to including instructions on visuals is you can create a bookmark and then have an opacity layer come up over the report page with narratives describing each visual that pop up when you hit the bookmark and then go away when you close them. That's a technique we've used in the past to make things really clear. These days, I'm mostly focused on building reports, but yeah. Or not building reports, building models. I don't do a lot of report building anymore. So we talked about how we can use Tabular Editor to build out descriptions, but now we're going to start to get into how we can get those out into some other product. So the sort of best approach is if you come into DAC Studio and you connect to your model. So here I'm actually connected to an XMLA endpoint.
Now, can you snap out to show where you're connecting for the DMVs?
Yeah.
Just your face is covered here at the bottom.
Oh yeah. Yeah, let me just move this over. No, not like that. Like this. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see now. At the bottom here, you're used to mostly working on this tab, but if you come over to the DMV tab, you'll be presented with a list of functions which aren't super clear as to what they do. But there's lots of really good information in here. So just for example, I'm going to run this query here, DM schema, and I think I need to reconnect. So let me just do that. And
then Alex, if you could zoom in on the DMV there.
Yeah.
Anyone got zoom in.
If that's better. Or actually, yeah. No, not over here. So if we come down to the bottom of DAC Studio, you'll see the DMVs, and then this is where the list is. So coming out of that, now that I've reconnected, I'm going to run this DMV here. And what this is going to pull out is a list of all the columns in my model and a whole bunch of information. But you'll see that it does include the descriptions. And so if I scroll down some more, I'll probably find, well, there's a long list of stuff. Haven't written descriptions for a lot of them. So there's a number of these queries. And if you run Vertipack Analyzer, whether built into DAC Studio or the Excel standalone, you're going to get a nice schema of all of this stuff. And not everything that's in the DMVs, but a lot of the interesting things. And that's really the core of building some sort of automatic documentation.
So do me a favor, open the search of DMVs. Let's kind of go through our mental checklist here.
Mm-hmm.
If I type in tables.
Yeah.
Get rid of, there we go. So here's a listing of all of our tables within our model. So maybe if we ran one of these.
Yeah. So now, I have a list of all of my tables and their names. And then this will give us storage information, but now we can look at measures if we run. I'm not sure the TM schema is going to work. It might. Yeah, it does. And here I actually get the DACs and not just the.
Look at that.
Oh, yeah. So I actually
get full screen again for us, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah, let's, I had to close my window resizer. So, yeah. So here we can see we have the DACs. We get the format strings. We get the display folders, so you can build a nice hierarchy off of the data you get. All the information you need to build a real data dictionary. So that's where we're going to go next. Alex, I don't know if you want to switch over and talk about VertiPack Analyzer.
Give me 1 second here.
No.
We got a couple questions here coming through. So got it. The issue is having too many pages for tooltips, at least one for each KPI, more for complex visuals. Yeah, so I mean, especially this goes back to our earlier conversations, like how much documentation is too much.
Yeah.
If the visual is way too complex and nobody gets it, and you feel like you have to create an entire document list or registry of all the details, maybe looking, I don't want to say dumb it down, but see if you can do like a less complex visual.
Yeah.
If your organization is maybe not at that level. Like for me, columns and lines still run the world. Whenever I see people with like crazy sunburst, Sankey charts, I'm like, all right, but does your end user actually understand what this is trying to tell them?
Yeah, and also, like, making a measurement too complicated, even if it makes the measurement more accurate, can really detract from it. So we had a problem. One of the things that our sales managers really like to look at is a list of, they call it top gainers and decliners, customers that have moved the most, that they should focus some attention on and like either figure out what's working or figure out what's not working. And there's lots of methodologies you could use. A popular methodology is to do just year-over-year growth, but there's lots of issues, and we started breaking down what is the absolute best way to measure this, and we came up with a measure that is the variance in the month-over-month, or the month-over-month change in the variance to quota. So how much did the over or under attainment change from this month to last month? That measure is super good for this, but it is so complicated that I had to do like 15-minute presentations on what the measure meant multiple times, and so it wasn't valuable. Even though it was by far more accurate than just looking at year over year, because there were so many effects that could cause you to see the same customers over and over again. Yeah. So if you feel like you need a lot of explanation, then maybe you need to simplify your approach.
Yeah, and a couple other questions here. So could probably use DMVs and clean up in Power Query. So I mean, you could connect to your DMVs, which we're going to talk about here a little bit later too.
Yeah.
Which is freaking awesome in our opinion, because I know Alex has got VertiPack Analyzer here also pulled up. So all VertiPack Analyzer is doing is going through the DMVs and showing you kind of the column level sizes, table size, etc., and now showing you metrics based on that.
Right. So this view is really focused on optimizing your model, and we'll talk about that more in another show. But like, this is really the best approach to optimizing what's in your model. But those same DMVs can let you build a data dictionary. So in this document here, I've taken just straight up VertiPack Analyzer and I've just hidden fields to create what feels more like a data dictionary. I've got my table, I've got the description of the table, I've got my columns in the table, and then I've got the descriptions of the columns, and then it is somewhat interesting to folks to know, like, hey, there's how many values that's in this column, right? But it's still not super clear, but you can absolutely take VertiPack Analyzer and turn it into a data dictionary. This is just through hiding and rearranging columns. And a similar approach on the DAC side. Yeah.
And for kind of those maybe within the group right now, Do you have a page like dedicated to like documentation of your model? Are you kind of like copying and pasting your DAX measures into like a text box, or how are you maybe presenting some of this information to your end users? I'd be curious.
Oh.
Kind of let some of these, and then Kevin had said a challenge I have maybe importing the DMVs to desktop from AAS.
Yeah. We're gonna go to that topic really soon, and what we're gonna talk about is in the context of Power BI, but it should work exactly the same for AAS. In fact, it will work a little bit better for AAS because non-admins in AAS can run more DMVs than non-admins against a Power BI premium model. Don't want to go into any more detail than that, but you can do more stuff as a non-admin in AAS. Someone
I run the VertiPack analyzer in Excel and kind of share that workbook out in the Power BI workspace.
Yeah, we've done that. We've also penned the VertiPack analyzer in Teams, so we'll have a Teams channel devoted to the platform with discussion and then all the documentation. So a deck about how to get access, and then this Excel file. That's sort of our first approach. Donald asked about the referential integrity column. This referential integrity tells you if you have keys that appear in one side of a relationship that don't appear in another side of the relationship. It can be a really valuable thing to do. So it can, having RI validity can speed up relationships or measures in general. So yeah. So Alex, it looks like you're ready to talk about Power Query and DMVs. Do you want to switch over to your screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So knowing that Power BI is analysis services underneath the engine here, how could I connect to those DMVs, maybe in like a Power BI report? So it's like self-documenting now. So I ripped through the VertiPack Analyzer Excel edition, and I was like, all right, well, let's just rebuild this in Power BI. I mean, this would be fantastic now, right? So we'll do our transform data up here at the very top. And then we'll grab a couple things here as well whenever the Power Query.
Yeah.
And then this file will be available for everyone kind of after the meeting.
Yeah. And we'll
Just
even
waiting on it. There we go. Awesome. So in this example, all you need to do is pass through your localhost port, or if you're on Power BI Premium, so XMLA, or if you're analysis services, you can just pass in this address.
Yeah.
So
Alex, maybe let's hit some zoom it there.
Yep. I'm gonna grab the localhost port if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Quick. Sales demo. So I'm gonna grab this bottom right-hand corner here of DAC Studio. You might be able to see it here if I'm hidden a little bit. There we go. So localhost, I'm going to copy this to clipboard, my 54143, knowing that each time I kind of jump into Power BI, it's going to assign me a new one. Cool. So server here on my parameters, I'm just going to pass this address here. So at the very top, get this updated, 54143. There's a couple formula firewall errors. So if you look at any of the code, don't worry, I've cleaned all of that up. All you have to do is kind of go through the edit credentials. And let's get this firing here in 1 second. Use my current credentials here, so just my local machine, my Windows credentials, that's fine. Press connect. And then we'll do a refresh all here.
Yeah. And
this was kind of a fun exercise because I showed this to Alex maybe 2 nights ago, and he stayed up until like midnight just rebuilding an awesome report here that he's in a demo here for you.
Yeah.
So here is the exact SQL statement kind of from the Excel version of SQL BI's VertiPack Analyzer. Rebuilt it over here in Power BI. Press run. And then what we'll have here, we'll go ahead and refresh all the tables. So refresh all. It'll keep yelling at me about these native queries that I have to run, and then we'll jump into the Power Query here for just a quick moment.
Yeah. So there are some things that VertiPack Analyzer does that you can't do with the DMVs. if you go look at their source code, you'll see that they're actually building some dynamic DACs as well. But everything that I'm interested in, we get from the DMVs. And so this can be a really good solution for that.
And then we'll see here kind of our Power Query statements, just analysis services connector. So the SQL Server analysis services, our server parameter, we get that catalog name, and then we just execute this SQL statement here against our DMV. So that system.discover storage table columns. So our storage tells us the size, if we remember that from Alex's example. So anywhere where we type storage, pops up the size related details. Let me go ahead and press done, and I'm going to jump out to the model and just do a quick close and apply so we can get all of the details all at once.
Yeah. So one of the downsides of this is because the port always changes, Power BI always feels like it's a new source, and as a result, it's going to prompt you about these native queries every single time, which is frustrating.
Say the least.
But and we're actually, we'll get into this a little more later. We've been looking at a way to iterate through several XML endpoints, or maybe even every XML endpoint you have access to. But if you want to do that, you're just going to need to hit run for an hour.
Yep.
And so we've been trying to think through, is there a way to do this without native queries? Or we saw with there could be other approaches that we could use, but we're not sure yet.
Yep, something still we're testing.
Oh.
In theory, I mean, this would be a great thing for an organization where they could just have the VertiPaq analyzer in their workspace, where it goes through all of the different data sets, and then from there it prompts people, hey, here are the columns of interest, here are the things you should watch out for. Because especially for us, it's like, how do you train people to understand what the VertiPaq analyzer is? Yeah. Is it like a crawl, walk, run, where we can give them conditional columns that say, hey, here are red columns, we should really have a discussion about these.
Yeah.
Here are kind of the yellow, where it's like maybe they're worth kind of some warning, and then green is like, there's such a great compression rate. Don't even worry about these. Bring in all of your data. Everything's safe and fine all the time.
Yeah. Chris Wagner, you may need to hire someone to, or this is the other thing we were talking about, is use Power Automate to set an RPA job to click run for you. So Chris, maybe that's a good option for your 10,000 XML endpoints.
Yep.
But I don't know.
So we're starting to get loaded in the model. And then somebody asked, hey, is this PBX going to be shared somewhere? Love to check it out under the hood. Definitely. Benny, and then
it's already.
You've got more of a kind of.
Yeah. Well, that's loading.
Ready to go.
Why don't we switch over to my screen and I'll take a look. So here I've connected to I've got the same transform data, except in this case, I'm connected to the XML endpoint of the model that I work on. And one of the great things about VertiPaq Analyzer, this is the thing that the reason Marco created it in the first place, is none of the data that you get is proprietary. So this is like my real production models that I work on at work, but all we're going to see is like how many rows there are and none of the data. And so it's an easy way to share. But this is what I've done with the data that comes out of VertiPaq Analyzer. And so this is this view is focused on model optimization. But if we switch over to model details, now we have something that's a little bit more data dictionary-like. So again, I have the same data that we were looking at in that Excel, but it's more readable. So I've got my columns grouped by display folder and by table. I've got it set up so they can filter out hidden columns very easily. If they just want to say, hey, I just care about this table, they can come in and see that exact table. And then if they click this button here, control click in desktop, we come over and we have the same thing for measures. And again, if I want to come up to performance measures and come here, they can come in and see if they really want to know how we're doing aggregations. They can read that, see the format strings and the descriptions, So if they're trying to rebuild the model, now in our case, that's not really going to work because the aggregations really hide all the underlying logic. But yeah, so that's this page, and then you can continue to go through all of the VertiPaq Analyzer components. And because this is just Power Query, we should just be able to publish this to the service and set it to auto refresh against the XMLA. So anytime you change your model, this data dictionary is going to automatically update. And what we're working toward, this is why we're playing with how can we connect to multiple things, is to be able to have it for your whole environment. So if you're trying to manage multiple Power BI premium capacities or even just one, you can get a list of the largest columns across all your models. Maybe you have a particular, so for example, in this model, one of the most expensive fields is this account number. And this is a integer, or not an integer, it's a string key. And maybe you have that in lots of your models, and you're like, you see across many models the same large column. Well, that information might tell you that it would be a good idea to create a surrogate key approach, where now you don't have to store quite as much information, and since it's really popular, this is going to save you lots of memory on lots of models. So we're still working on this because we still want to find a better way than hitting run 10,000 times.
Yep.
But we're hoping to release a cross-environment approach that will let you connect to everything that's on an XMLA endpoint. And also, we really think that this is a better way to consume VertiPaq Analyzer. So rather than just having a whole sea of stuff, we've got a couple things for you to focus on, which is, okay, first of all, I'm just sorting by size. Here's my 15 largest columns. And guess what? This model is 15 gigabytes, so I really only care about things that are, hundreds of megs. But in a smaller model, you might only care about stuff. But if we come into the details and look at columns by size, like, I have so many columns that are like 20 kilobytes, and I never ever need to look at optimizing these. And so having some sort of sort here. And then the other thing we've done is added some color coding around data types, so you can quickly see, in order of how much space they take, and you can quickly look at uniqueness, which lets you focus on like your really high cardinality values, which can be a good place to start with optimization. Again, I contend that, yes, the uniqueness is really high on some of these, but they're only a couple megs, and so I don't care. But others I really, really care about, like this account timeline ID across 3 tables, it's over 20% of my model. So.
And this is kind of a topic that you and me were talking about too, is a lot of people don't really understand that, obviously the compression and all these things come into factor. So how does this relate back to kind of documentation, descriptions? Mm-hmm. If there was a reason for you to bring it in, then you should be able to justify that reason if there is an extreme cost to your model now. Because if this one column bloats your entire model and I ask you what it is, and you're like, well, I don't really know. I just hit get data and I brought it all in.
Yeah.
That's a reason why it should be documented or removed completely.
Here's a really good example. Here's a column that has a super obscure name that clearly you haven't taken time to format nicely. It's 2% of the model, which in this case means that it's, 300 megabytes. Or no, not quite that big, but it's a substantial column. Like, what are you doing here? And in this case, this is a feature that we're still developing. But if you're looking at your coworkers' models, this is a really quick way to sort of say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah. And I would kind of position this, if you were a Power BI administrator or Power BI premium capacity administrator, how can you make this a part of your practice? Or even if you're in a pro environment, of just, here's our template file, just put in your local host port number, load it up your first time, and let's have a consultative meeting where we get in a room for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. We say, hey, here are a couple columns that I noticed.
Yeah.
So kind of in our example here with the uniqueness,
Mhm.
if it's 100% unique and it's used for a join, that's a justified reason. I have to have that.
Yeah.
It's the cost of doing business. If it's a free-form text field that I just bring in because I like reading text,
Yeah.
well, that takes up 200 megabytes of
Yeah.
our 1 gigabyte limit in a pro environment.
Yeah.
Is that really necessary?
If you look at the top of this model, you'll see integer, 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 fact columns. This is like what you want to see in terms of these super high cardinality things. But if we scroll down a page and instead of seeing this, you saw this, you're like, hey, a substantial portion of your model is all these names. Like, do you really need all these names? And this is a really good place to start. The other thing we see really commonly inside Microsoft is because we're 100% pro and premium is like, I mean, because we just give ourselves pro licenses, everybody has them. So lots of folks, they build big pro models and then they come with this question like, hey, my model's a gig. Do I want to buy premium? And it's like, well, to get a good premium experience for your 2 gig model, you're going to need to spend a couple $1,000s a month. Like, are you sure that's what you want to do? Like, you need to look at this before you make a decision like that. So, yeah.
A lot of great comments here. People are loving kind of the VertiPack Analyzer being transitioned over to Power BI.
Yeah.
Especially, if we can get this kind of operating at the tenant level where you could just iterate through all of the XML endpoints.
Yeah.
And like Alex, you said this is a 15 gigabyte model.
Yeah, that's right.
So this VertiPack Analyzer has got to be huge, right?
No, it's really not. If I look here, it's 1 meg.
Yeah. So all we're doing is that metadata, right? So
yeah.
Our descriptions, our DAX measures, all we're doing is bringing in that metadata into a model. I mean, this stuff is incredibly small.
Yeah, I mean, if we connect to our VertiPack Analyzer model with VertiPack Analyzer and view metrics on this, we'll see that the data is 2 megabytes. It's a super small. The query times are really fast. Yeah.
That's why I think that this could be important. And I mean, I would love for this to even be a native feature within the service for pro models, or just like a view usage of like how many people look at my report. Why couldn't I just have a thing that says, hey, can you go out and analyze my report through the DMVs? I mean, maybe that's an ideas.powerbi.com we all got to get behind, but I would love to have something native in the service for folks.
Well, Alex, maybe in a few sessions here we should go back over the thing I presented at the user group you went to a couple months ago about using ad technology and tracking pixels to measure report usage. So before we spend all of our time promoting this, let's sort of take a step back and talk about what this doesn't give you and what do you need to document that you're never going to get out of Power BI. Right?
So, I mean, complex decisions, you can obviously write some things within like Power Query or maybe your M scripts.
Yeah.
But within that, to extract details of Power Query M, if you're to try and run that DMV, it's going to say that, hey, you need Power BI Premium.
Yeah.
I hate that that's a limiter.
Yeah. The other thing that is super important is if the information you're trying to convey doesn't correspond to a table or a column, this is not a good fit for it. And so how to access the model. How do I use Excel? How do I use Power BI? How do I import? How do I live connect? What happens when my credentials get screwed up? None of that information makes any sense to put into a product like this. And you absolutely need documentation on that information. We haven't dug into coming up with a better way to visualize relationships, but this is not a good way for someone to understand your relationship diagrams. Now, it is true that now folks can see your relationship diagrams when they live connect. So that's a start. But you may want to create more documentation about how the relationships are working. Totally sure there. Some folks definitely feel that the relationship should be totally abstract. And in the case of our model, because we have like 5 aggregation tables and a whole snowflake thing, like the relationship diagram is not helpful to folks, but it may be to you. So that's definitely something to think about. Alex, are there any other things you think belong in a separate document?
I mean, for me, it always comes back to something that's completely out of the norm,
Yeah.
especially with like Power Query, where I have to do some very bizarre, very complex work. You need to document that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even some of the iterator stuff that people are up to with like a list.accumulate,
Yeah.
documented in the Power Query. If you haven't already looked at kind of Ben Gribaldo's PowerShell commandlets for extracting Power Query M, that is an awesome new kind of resource. And then he also has Data Mashup Explorer,
Yeah.
Excel, what is it, Monkey Tools from
Yeah.
Excel Guru. And then for me, I mean, it does come back to like the visual layer. Unfortunately, it's not like an area that me and Alex spend a lot of time in, I think.
Yeah.
It's just like we're more on the modeling kind of pre-prep side, but can you make a nice report that is easy for people to consume, that tells them exactly what's in your models?
Yeah.
So whether it be table name, column name, descriptions, that way people aren't, having to hover above the fields pane list. They can instantly go through and maybe search. And then with a lot of these too, you can export them to a CSV. So if you wanted to iterate or go through your entire environment and maybe create like a database, you can do that. Find the data sources that everyone's using, turn those into a data flow. So in that way, it's just a central kind of entity that everyone's using.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of really kind of neat things that you could do with the DMVs if you haven't already started playing with them.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would think about documenting, and this sort of comes back to you're talking about documenting Power Query, is if you're making design decisions, especially design decisions that cut across best practice, those are really important to have some approach to documenting. Like, hey, why did we decide to use direct query? Maybe you should write that down. Why aren't you using a star schema? Why do you have 5 aggregation tables? It's not for performance. Tell me why you did it. Right? Like, those are really good things to have a quick document, not for your users, but for the person who has to support the model, because you don't want to be the only person supporting a model, a substantial model. Yeah.
You want to be able to walk away from it one day.
Yeah.
Well, then let's pause here. We'll get caught up on some of these comments here. Maybe it's a smaller target, but it gives some diagnostics to models on Power BI Report Server as well. Premium has some capacity help, but when you go on-prem, you're alone. Yeah, on-prem is kind of difficult.
Yeah. As you might imagine, inside Microsoft, we don't really have on-prem stuff, since we want you to believe that the cloud is totally the way to go. We try to live that life. So I have no experience with Report Server. I don't know, Alex, if you even have a demo environment or clients that use Report Server.
No, I stay away from it as much as I can. But I understand its importance.
Yeah.
But hopefully, kind of with the recent addition, Chris Finland was talking about being able to spin up Report Server out on Azure resources. If you didn't see that blog post, definitely read through it. It's kind of like that next crawl, walk, run to the cloud if there's consideration of getting up there. I'm always curious too on Report Server because people are like, oh, I'm worried about security.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you have bring your own key, you have encryption, you have all these other elements. So what is the reason for actually staying on Report Server? But that's a whole another topic. We could live there all hour. So I love kind of Felipe. This is awesome for teaching optimization or to help Power BI Premium tenant administrators.
Yeah.
The goal, especially with the DMVs, is how can you help your user not only like extract their information out in a way that they don't have to get as technical, but putting things front and center. So like the uniqueness column, kind of the idea for us there was how can you just easily tell them, maybe it's a red, green, yellow kind of call out where you say, if it's 100%, those are reds for us. If it's, maybe 80%, those are kind of our yellow columns we want to have discussions about. Then anything green, I'm not really too worried about, but it's getting folks to think about why am I bringing this in? And then at that point, hopefully they're not documenting 200 columns that are documenting maybe like the 50 they actually needed to solve their problem.
Right.
And that's always the biggest thing for me is never bring in more than what you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I see that is the biggest point of failure in a lot of projects is people just trying to do too much all at once and they lost perspective of the initial question that they were trying to answer.
Yeah. Because I've been spending a bunch of time writing a bunch of descriptions in our model. So one of the things I find is if I your camera just moved again. I don't know what the deal with OBS is. Yeah. I do think it's Skype. So hopefully Teams will get NDI support soon. Anyway, one of the problems I have encountered recently using going through this process of writing descriptions is if you try to document every column, you'll get to a column that's just like, this is the key for the account table. And it's like, you get stuck on whether you should write anything. And so I would try to not rattle on things that are the explanation feels tautological, or if the explanation is hard, like just move on to the next column and try and write something for things that you know are important and are easy to explain, and then come back to the stuff that maybe isn't so interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, believe it or not, people do have jobs where they write descriptions for things. So where it's like us, or like, I'm a technical guy, I'm gonna write a technical sentence. There might be someone whose role can actually, like data governance, kind of cataloging. If that role exists within your organization, I mean, definitely kind of leverage them or any resources that they may have.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris is talking about, we have 2 masters in library services that do our documentation. I mean, that's fantastic if you already have those kind of in your org. I mean, that is such an important role people maybe take for granted.
Yeah, having technical writers is a really good idea. And Chris, based on you mentioning this, we've definitely started chatting about should we have a technical writer. But also, like, that's a pretty expensive choice relative to all the other things that you could do. I think it totally makes sense if you've got 10,000 workspaces on premium. But for a lot of us, we sort of have to write our own documentation. The other problem we've encountered with other teams in our org have hired technical writers to help write operational documentation, and they found that conveying the information to the technical writers to write good documentation on their super complex process is almost as much work as writing the documentation themselves.
Yeah. And
so, like, yes, the writers add a lot of value because they're clearly better writers, but like, don't necessarily, it's not obvious that they're going to save a lot of time, especially if you're like, oh, we'll just do this for a year and get some documentation and then be done. Like, they need to be part of the organization to actually understand what you're trying to do, or they're just ghostwriting your book for you.
Yeah, don't bring them in at the very end.
Yeah.
They need context throughout your project. Oh, no, that's great. So what else do we have here? Kind of looking back through some of the comments, kind of the later half here. We'll get this template out to people. Like I say, we're still a work in progress for us. We want to clean up a few things and kind of validate some stuff, at least on the Microsoft side. If you were in the Guy in a Cube chat, we kind of told them we were going to sidebar.
Yeah.
DMVs, hopefully everyone's looking into those. I've dropped the documentation. We'll have that below in the kind of descriptions here for everyone, but
yeah,
at the very least, start looking into them.
Yeah, and I have published what we have so far on my GitHub. I just put a link to it in the chat. And as you look through it, you'll see that there's sort of work in progress stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a pretty good start there.
Yep. Awesome. Well, hopefully everyone appreciates that. Man.
Yeah,
this is just such a great topic. I don't think enough people always talk about. And the reason why it really hits home for me is because composite models in September, being able to join multiple data sets, you got to have something.
Yeah, that is going to require your Live Connect users to have a much better understanding of how your models work. when they can take two models and they have to decide where to create relationships between them, they're really going to have to understand which keys to use and, like, hey, don't create a relationship between the fact tables. You need to, like, bridge some dimensions. And it's a super powerful feature, but there's going to be a lot of work to get folks to understand how it works. The other thing that we haven't really gotten into, but the stuff we talked about with DMVs can be combined with the Power BI REST APIs to do environment level documentation. And ultimately, what we would love to do for this is have it use the REST API to pull all the workspaces on Premium and then query all those workspaces. I think we're going to, with the number of native queries and the fact that each data source is separate, anytime a new XML endpoint appears, that would cause your refresh to fail. So I think for now, we're going to build it as you have to specify the list of endpoints. But definitely, the REST APIs go really nicely into this stuff.
Yeah, so if you're in an environment that has just premium capacity, multiple workspaces, iterate through the workspace level REST API, and then kind of fire off all these DMVs. In theory, I mean, if you could document your entire environment and have a live connection just on any data set refreshes, I mean, that is going to be insane.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's more like pie in the sky for right now, crawl, walk, run for where your organization is at. If it's simply a PBIT file that you tell your users to go out and grab, input their localhost port number, and then from there, you guys have that consultative meeting. Hey, here are my columns, here are my descriptions, here's everything documented. Cool.
Yeah.
The more you can templatize and automate your work, the better. I don't want people copying and pasting DAX measures from Power BI Desktop into a Word document. You already have the DMV, go query it.
Yeah.
Go on to the next problem.
I think with the REST API, I think the last thing to say, because this is where you and I started when we started looking at the REST API, is Miguel Escobar has a GitHub repository with a custom connector for Power Query that sort of abstracts away all the work of authentication to be able to really easily understand all the REST API options that you have in Power Query. So I'm going to put that in the chat here.
Deanna has a great question here. So anything about dashboard performance and documentation, there's much less content about dashboard-focused solutions. I would agree.
Yeah, I haven't created a dashboard in 3 years, and I can't see ever creating one at this point. You have fewer design options. With composite models, like, they have some utility in being able to show metrics from separate reports that aren't connected, but with composite models, like, you can do that without connecting the models. So I'm not sure why you would create a dashboard for that anymore. Auto refresh, we have that in reports now. Like, I just don't know what a dashboard is for anymore. So
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a controversial topic here. She's like 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, dashboards are great. The area that always kills me is when I see people overload a dashboard and treat it like a report page, or pin a live report page. And I'm like, why did you do that? Why not just? Because if you think about the app experience, they really have no idea what is a dashboard or what is a report. If you lay out the app navigation experience correctly, they're just clicking on the different tabs.
Yeah.
I have so many conversations around that where people are like, oh, we've got to put it all in a dashboard. And it's like, well, who cares? It's a 4-cornered report. Like, they won't know the difference.
And you can design a report that looks and feels like a dashboard, but it'll look much better because you have so much more design flexibility.
Yeah. So we're using dashboards specifically different from reports. This is actually a good question. Visual overload with pin the visual. Yeah, people do that a lot. I mean, 3 to 5, 5 to 7 really should be kind of at your dashboard. Think about kind of driving a vehicle. I think I've only used dashboards for real-time data streaming from events. I would agree. In terms of real-time
Yeah.
Dashboards have a great experience there.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that dashboards can do well. It's just, I think you can do those same things in a report. And if you just take the time to design your report page with those goals in mind, other than the real-time streaming thing, there's not a lot of stuff that you would use a dashboard for that you couldn't just do with a report page.
Yeah. Laura here saying create dashboard to create tiles for a Power App. Yep. So
Yeah.
Power Apps integration will be like pin a tile. So I mean that would be like easier. I would agree, much easier than just creating kind of a flow-blown report. For embedded, dropping tiles into Power Apps and websites. Yep, for Power Apps portals. Dashboards are suitable for senior executives that just want to see the high level and click through. I would agree. Kind of my almost contrast on the dashboards is when people are like, I want every regional manager to see their metric on the dashboard.
Yeah.
Well, then it's like you have like 20 different single card tiles.
Yeah.
And it's like, what have we even done at this point? We're just recreating a report in a dashboard. The one point I will make, at least in terms of dashboards, if you ever do like a tenant migration to move your content from one region to another, it is the most painful experience in the world. You lose a lot of content. One thing you cannot export is dashboards.
Yeah.
So if you ever get in that position, or if you're ever in a consulting position where you have to kind of take on that adventure, dashboards will be your biggest pain point. There's not a lot of metadata that's exposed. The only thing that you can do on the PowerShell side is move a dashboard tile from one workspace to another. That is it.
Yeah.
That is it. Awesome. Well, we're coming up here on the hour. Alex, any last closing thoughts here for kind of the topic of hand today with documentation?
No, I mean, I guess I do have one closing thought, which is that, like, documentation is hard, and you want to spend a commensurate amount of time on it relative to the size of your project. But if your project is something that's going to be used for more than, a quarter, you really need to spend time on it, and you're just going to have to sit down and write. Yeah.
And especially, I mean, if you can document it as you go, that's great. If you are going to try and take on everything at the very end, just be very cognizant with your time.
Yeah.
How much is too much? What is actually going to end up on the kind of cutting room floor?
Yeah.
For me, I'm always thinking about, I'm more like the Excel background. We didn't really have good documentation. Like I wasn't documenting what was in the contents of cell A1. So knowing the fact that Power BI at least has native functionality where I can go in and write table level descriptions, column level descriptions, or even measure, start doing that today at the very least. In the future, Tabular Editor, you can do some additional documentation. Whenever you start doing kind of Power BI Premium and connecting multiple data sets, you really want to start thinking about, this is going to be productionized throughout my entire organization. How can I make everyone's lives as easy as possible? Just having documentation within my model.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, nothing is lost because you can query them through the DMVs. So data dictionaries, hopefully Azure Data Catalog connectivity, all of this metadata that you've invested your time in will then be exposed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. I think we're going to continue this every other Saturday schedule. We haven't quite decided what we're going to do next time.
Yeah, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, definitely some of the things at the top of our list are actually spending some time optimizing models. We want to spend more time on sort of DevOps, but we want to wait until the external tools integration is fully out, because I think it's going to totally change how we're going to do that. And we have other topics on our list, but we'd love to hear what you'd like to have us chat about. So, yeah, thanks everybody.
Awesome. Thank you again, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
Yeah.